What is going on, everybody? Welcome into our next positional breakdown video for the 2024 NFL Draft. Today, we are talking about a running back class that, frankly, I'm a little tired of hearing about how bad this running back class is. Is it the best class ever? Is it the strongest group in this class? Certainly not. But I think there's 4 or 5 guys in this group that are going to be legit starters in the league. I think everybody we're going to talk about here today has a good chance of being a key role player or a part of a rotation in the league. And especially as we get to our number 1 running back, there's a player in this class that I don't think is getting enough hype as a potential star running back in the league. I think that's a big reason why people don't like this class is they're like, oh, there's no superstar in this class. I disagree. We'll get to that in the end. But before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please hit that like button. It really does help me out. It takes just a second. I really appreciate it. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these positional breakdown videos. They'll be coming out more frequently as we lead up to the draft. And we are so close to 100,000. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here on this journey. But let's get started. One quick disclaimer for those that have followed my other positional rankings videos. I've reduced the splits between the overall grade that I give these players. And we've had a lot more ties, more to kind of indicate, okay, these guys are in a cluster, in a tier. I do still letter them A, B, C, D to show you who I prefer within that cluster. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is we're actually going to be talking about 12 top 10 running backs here today. We have a 4-way tie at number 9. So I lied to you. This isn't the top 10 running backs. This is the top 12 running backs, but I don't think you guys will complain. Let's get started with my 9D, aka my 12th ranked running back in this class. And while I'm higher on this class overall, this is a player that I think I'm a lot lower on, actually, and that is Bucky Irving out of Oregon. Look, Bucky has, I would say, the most fun highlight reel of anybody we're going to talk about here today. He is the true human joystick type. The Madden players out there are going to love Bucky Irving, and even in Madden, he's going to be pretty good because this dude's juke move is going to be bordering on the 90s as a rookie. Like, that is the type of back he is. But here's the problem. This isn't Madden. This is real life football we're talking about here, and Bucky Irving is 5'9", 192 pounds. That is tiny. And when you search through the archives and try to find a player at this size that has really made it work at the running back position as like a starter or the focal point of an offense, it just doesn't really exist. You might point to Kyren Williams, who's about 8 pounds heavier, but 5'9", 200, very small, probably the closest physical comp. But even then, Kyren had elite vision. He really trusts his blocking, even coming out of Notre Dame, running gap and inside runs, whereas Bucky is much more of that jitterbug type. He sees second-level defenders really well and has good vision, but when Oregon ran gap and like pulled their guards, he didn't really trust the blocking most of the time. He really looks to bounce things outside, where he is much more of that jitterbug type, whereas Kyren Williams uses his height to his advantage to stay low, fight for tough yardage, and that's what we've seen with the Rams. So even his closest kind of physical comp in the league right now is stylistically very different. And then you might say, well, TFG, I thought your opinion of these smaller backs was going up after what we saw last year with Jahmyr Gibbs and Keaton Mitchell and Devon Achane and got to shout out Jaleel McLaughlin over in Denver. Yes, those guys are also tiny backs like Bucky Irving, but the big difference is all those guys can burn. They can really run, and if you're going to be small, well, force equals mass times acceleration. At least those guys have the speed to generate some power through contact. That's not Bucky Irving, right? Bucky is a lateral specialist, ran a 4.55, which is fine, but his speed, not just in the 40 time, but on tape, it's solid, but nothing special, right? Not like those other backs we just mentioned. So with Bucky Irving, it's just really tough to project him as a guy that NFL coaching staffs are going to trust to give a large workload in the league. He just doesn't have a power profile. He's a little bounce heavy. And when he gets to the league, his ability to jump cut guys out of their shoes and juke these guys in space, it's still going to be there, but that rate is going to come down significantly. And when you reduce that big strength in his game from what it was in college, you're left with more of a lackluster profile, at least as a running threat. But the reason he still makes my top 10 list is I do think there is a path for him to be that third down running back in the league, because it's not that he can't be a running threat in the NFL. I just don't project him as a starting running back in the league. But, if it's 3rd and 8 and you want to run inside zone with the intentions of going for it on 4th down, if he doesn't get the 8 yards, Bucky can totally do that when the defense is spaced out. He can be a draw threat. I think he can rotate in, run some more outside zone than he got to run at Oregon. I think he can be a decent backup running back and a 3rd down running threat. But I think his biggest asset in the league ultimately is probably going to have to be in that Theo Riddick role, the J.D. McKissick role, the true 3rd down back, where he can be an outlet, a dump down, or a quick swing pass in your progression, where if he can make that safety miss or that linebacker miss or that slot corner miss, he can turn a 3-yard completion into an 8-yard completion and a 1st down. He can be a really dynamic screen threat, because that's where he's best, is out in space, just make a couple guys miss, so he can be a total headache there. And he was a productive receiver at Oregon, so it's not too hard to project him into that role, but he's a really abysmal pass protector, and I don't know if that's going to improve with his size. And he did have some frustrating drops throughout his time at Oregon, so that's a part of it that I would like to see him clean up. And beyond that, he was a productive receiving threat at Oregon, but it was swings, screen passes, and like I said, you can use them that way, but I would love to see Bucky really use that foot speed to develop some better route running, where if he could, come out of the backfield and be a really nasty threat on two-way goes and option routes, then you're really talking with him as a legit receiving threat. So that is a path for Bucky Irving, but ultimately the size and lack of a dominant physical profile did leave me a little bit underwhelmed as I projected him out of the Pac-12 and into the NFL. But let's get to my 11th ranked running back, or my 9C ranked running back. And by the way, if you want access to my full player rankings, I have 23 running backs fully scouted and written up on my draft guide over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. We've got so many more other players there as well. We're going to be getting into 7-round mock drafts for all 32 teams in the weeks leading up to the draft. So you can get some exclusive content. You can support my channel. That's all over at patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy. But my next running back is Ray Davis out of Kentucky. And Ray is someone we probably don't need to spend too much time on, but his floor was so good, I had to include him in my top 12. And my pro comp for him is another Davis, Mike Davis, who has basically either been the best backup in the league when he was, in his prime, or the worst starter in the league. And that's kind of exactly how I see Ray Davis. Solidly built, solid athlete all around, really refined at the position, really with the exception of his pass blocking, where I want to see some more from him there. But a no-nonsense style runner with good vision on any type of run that you want to go to, a guy that has really toted the rock a lot. I think he has 800 carries in his career at Kentucky, which is a pro and a con, because he's experienced, he's high floor, he can step in right away, but also someone that, if he did ever become a starter, you're going to start to have some durability concerns after a couple years, I think, as tends to happen with these backs. But drafting Ray Davis in the 4th or 5th round is eating your vegetables, right? It is saying, well, we have a starter. He's either getting older or he gets banged up, but we can take Ray Davis. He can be our backup running back right away on a cheap contract. If our guy gets banged up a couple games, Ray Davis can step right in and basically do everything we ask him to, with the exception, I would say, of the pass blocking, where he's just really inconsistent. He misses his strikes, he dips his head. Got to clean that stuff up, which is pretty normal for, rookie running backs. But he's just a very solid player, and as you look at that role fit tag that I put on these graphics and inside my draft guide. He is the true definition of an innings eater at running back, that mid-range relief pitcher that you can't go through a season without in baseball. Very similar to what Ray Davis's role, I think, will be in the NFL. And by the way, the description below has a lot of information for the stuff you're seeing on screen if you have questions about anything you're seeing in these graphics. But let's get to officially my number 10 running back in my top 10 list, and that is Isaac Guerendo out of Louisville by way of Wisconsin. One of the more boom or bust, fascinating prospects that we're going to talk about here on this list. Guerendo has had a very fast rise into the NFL picture here in really 2023, leading into 2024 with his pre-draft hype building up here. You know, Guerendo spent 3 years at Wisconsin, never really saw the ball. When Braylon Allen got there as a freshman in Guerendo's junior year, he was like, well, shit, I'm definitely never touching the ball now. Braylon Allen's going to be on this list in a little bit. So he transferred, but 3 years at Wisconsin never really became much. Then he goes to Louisville in his fourth year. He's never really much. And then enter year 5, this most recent season. Eventually, he just had too many explosive touches that they had to give him the ball more into the second half of the year. But even in his 2 years at Louisville, he never really rose to these true starting ranks. By the end of it, he was kind of rotating with Jawar Jordan, who, just to put that in perspective, of the 23 ranked running backs that I just told you I have on my draft board, Jawar Jordan is currently 23rd and will probably finish lower than that when I add more players to the list. There's just not a whole lot there with Jawar Jordan, and Guerendo couldn't even really fully overtake him at Louisville. So there's some frustrations with Guerendo, and I don't think it's just, oh, the coaches were wrong, they were missing on Guerendo. Now, there's probably some of that too, but look, the highlights on Guerendo speak for themselves. Like the high-end play and the potential for him, I don't really need to sell you on that. He's 6 foot, 220. I'm showing you some of these runs now. He ran a 4.33. Like, his long speed is insane. That's why my pro comp is Raheem Mostert. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But when it comes to his weaknesses, his vision is really nothing to write home about. I think his vision on wide zone runs, which is where he's going to be used best in the NFL, is pretty good. Like, he'll press the corner, he'll use his speed, but he actually sees cutback lanes really well too. So that's a huge plus, because that's how you're going to want to use him, is in one of these Shanahan-style systems. But inside zone, power, like gap stuff, trusting his blockers, hitting a hole, very, very underwhelming stuff. Just very non-committal, very underdeveloped for a fifth-year player. And even the way he kind of accelerates into contact, I hate to call a player soft, but for a guy that runs a 4.33 at 220, there's a lot of times where you just wish he would just lower his shoulder, fight for tough yardage, instead of maybe throwing that stiff arm, trying to get outside. And I think those are the frustrations, especially at Wisconsin, where they're like gap, power all day, just like pick the hole and go. I think Guerendo struggled to do that at Wisconsin. We saw it the same thing at Louisville. And another reason I think he struggles on these kind of inside runs is while he ran a 4.33, it is much more of a building speed. He doesn't really have that ability to just bolt into a hole like that. And I think that plays into his running style. To put that in perspective, Bucky Irving's 10-yard split. We mentioned Bucky Irving ran a 4.55, which is kind of below average at this point for a running back. His 10-yard split was 1.54. Isaac Guerendo, the best 40 time in the class, 4.33. His 10-yard split was actually a split second slower, 1.55. So you see that on tape, and it's reflected in his 10-yard split. And that's why the wide zone really works well for him. It's that kind of building, rounding speed that you get from those more style of runs. But he got to run a lot more wide zone at Louisville, and that's really in the final year where you're like, oh shit, that's Raheem Mostert. And that's, I mean, the level of player Raheem Mostert has turned into his 30s is that of a top 5 to 8 running back in the league in the right fit. But I love this comp because Mostert, like Guerendo, came into the league an underdeveloped back out of Purdue, I believe, and was just kind of thrown around the league. No one really trusted him. But ended up in a wide zone system. And then really, even throughout his time, like you compare him in his early San Francisco tape to what he is in Miami, he started to really put his head down. He put on weight in a good way and became a much more powerful runner. So I look at Raheem Mostert's career path very similar to Isaac Guerendo, where I do think he's going to need to take to coaching and become a more physical runner, as you can sprinkle him in and pray for some home run hitting runs, maybe 4 or 5 carries a game on wide zone runs early on. And the other thing Mostert has really developed over the years is him being a receiving threat, which we just don't really have much of that from Guerendo. So I think he can be a capable backup right away, and his potential is through the roof. He has some of the best potential out of any of the backs we're going to discuss here today. But he is going to have to go to the right fit, and definitely, I think, a wide zone type of system. Luckily for Guerendo, as opposed to Mostert, when Mostert came into the league, it was like he had to wait till Kyle Shanahan found him. Now it's like there's 20 offenses in the league trying to do the Kyle Shanahan offense. So Guerendo's path to finding that scheme fit is probably going to be a lot faster than it was for Mostert. But really fun player, but there are a lot of issues in his game that I think needed to be addressed. And ultimately why I think he goes probably 4th or 5th round, despite the testing profile. But then we have our last running back in this 4-way tie for my number 9 spot. But again, the guy I prefer the most out of this group. And I got to him late. He was one of the last running backs I did preparing for this. And I love Will Shipley out of Clemson. Talk about a dynamic athlete in Will Shipley. We've talked about the building long speed of Isaac Guerendo. We've talked about the quick lateral agility of a Bucky Irving, but those guys had deficiencies, right? Bucky wasn't quite as fast. Guerendo a little bit slower to get to that top speed, much more stiff in terms of change of direction. Not Will Shipley. He has the full package. It's constantly on display on film, but it was reinforced by his workout at his pro day, a 4.46 40 with, again, a 1.54 10-yard split, which, again, is faster than Isaac Guerendo in a 10-yard split, which is a much more practical, more common range of running than that you'll see in the NFL. 38.5-inch vertical jump, a 10'2" broad jump, a 6'8" 3-cone, 4'10" shuttle. Even messed around and put up 16 bench reps at 206 pounds, which, bench reps are kind of meaningless in terms of how it applies to these players on the field, really, at most positions. But none of the backs we've talked about so far participated in the bench press, and I think it shows Shipley a little bit of that work ethic and commitment in the weight room. But his tape is so fun, man. I was really impressed and walked away asking, why are people not talking about Will Shipley a little bit more? Especially compared to like a Bucky Irving, where I see a similar style of back and kind of how they'll be used at the next level, but Shipley's a little bit bigger, he's faster. And I think when it comes to being that receiving threat, a much more diverse route runner. We saw Shipley run some beautiful angle routes out of the backfield, rapid foot speed in his routes. And I think Bucky Irving has that in him, but the ability to kind of explode out of those breaks and ditch guys with that speed, I think Shipley has a lot more of that. I also think Shipley's vision on inside runs was a little bit more trustworthy than Bucky Irving. So that's why I do prefer him to Bucky. But again, these guys are in a tier. These are all 4th, 5th round draft picks for me. And you are going to get some similar deficiencies with Will Shipley because he isn't the biggest guy. He's 5'11", 206, but that's a much more practical weight. There's a lot more examples of guys at that size having success as opposed to Bucky Irving. But just like we talked about with Bucky, like there's just not much of a power profile, much of a inside run profile that you can really project this guy out to be like a full workload type of back. And that's where I get to my pro comp on Will Shipley. And I got some crap for this, but I put down Reggie Bush, who was obviously an incredible college player, but a middling NFL player. He had the one big year in Detroit where everything kind of came together, but Reggie Bush for the rest of his career, where he was a 400-yard runner, a 500-yard receiver, and a third down back. I actually would argue Will Shipley moves and is the overall athlete very similar to Reggie Bush. Bush was just a little bit faster in terms of long speed, but Shipley's got plenty of long speed. I'm not worried about that. And I really think with Shipley, you're talking about, if everything comes together, you're talking about one of the more dynamic receiving backs in the league. Call it similar to like Austin Eckler, perhaps, as well. Might be a decent comp. But I think Shipley's just more athletic, and that's why I went with Reggie Bush. But you're just not going to get too much of that power profile. A very different style of runner than like Bucky, though. Like, I think Will Shipley can actually be a very dangerous outside zone runner because of some of that speed that he has to turn the corner. And I think Shipley's vision is like better in some areas, but worse in other areas. Like, I think Shipley trusts inside blocking much more than Bucky Irving. But Shipley would like dip his head sometimes and like kind of force it and not really see the rest of the field. Whereas Bucky was like the opposite, right? Bucky's like, instead of forcing anything, I'm going to bounce everything. And there's just some stylistic differences there. But I do think if you want to run gap runs or if you want to run outside zone, kind of being that speedy one-cut slasher, I think Will Shipley actually has a little bit more upside as a runner. But again, I still project him into more of a receiving back role. But I really walked away impressed by Will Shipley, was more gravitated towards his game than the first three that we talked about. But again, these guys are all grouped into 4th, 5th round picks that are potential starters / key role players in the league. But then we kind of take a jump up to 3 more backs that are tied for my number 6 ranking. And these are guys that I think have a much better projection as legit starters in the league, guys that might get 15, 20 carries a game at some point. Of course, Guerrero was potentially in that group as well, but a more boomer bust type of player. But anyway, my 6C or 8th ranked running back in this class is Aundreese Howard out of Notre Dame. A lot of people have soured on Estime because he ran a 4.71 40-yard dash at the combine and then said, yep, that's what I run. I'm not going to test again at the pro day. So he's not fast, right? Like, that's something you kind of knew about Aundreese Howard. But even then, he had some pull-away runs on film. You thought he would at least run in the 4.6s. But the thing with Estime is, like, if you liked him before the combine, you probably didn't like him because of his athleticism. You liked him for everything else: the size, the power, the vision, the toughness, the instincts. He is a really good, complete running back. And yes, I lowered him a little bit when I saw that 40 time because it's just a little bit of a bummer, right? But I don't think it matters so much that he can't be a starter in the league, especially when on tape, those breakaway runs, yards of 15 plus yards, were actually a big selling point of his tape. I had written better speed than you expect for a big guy in his draft write-up before he ran the 40. So I don't want to just put all the stock into that 40 time. For example, throughout the season, he had runs of 50 yards, 80 yards against NC State, 41 yards, 30 yards, 33 yards, 39 yards. He can break away. He does it on tape. Now, is it going to happen less in the NFL? Yes, certainly. That's going to be the case with all these guys. But I'm not so terrified of that 40 time that I'm just going to say, nope, he's undraftable, push him out of the top 10. I still think he's a really, really good back. And my pro comp for him is one that I feel kind of the most confident of for the backs in this class. And I have Jaylen Howard written down. Identical size. They move the same. Super similar style where they've really good one-cut vision. Honestly, lighter feet than you'd expect for such a big, powerful back. And Jaylen Howard, he was a 5th round pick that had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. A very productive NFL back. Yeah, eventually you might swing for a guy that's more athletic and move on to the higher upside back, but man, I really think that can be Aundreese Howard. I think you can get him late 3rd, early 4th round pick and potentially get a starter right out the gate. He, like I said, he's such a complete player. Ran every type of run in the book at Notre Dame, but especially a ton of gap and inside zone duo. That's actually where the league is heading towards more of these days. Even the Shanahan style systems are running a lot more gap, and I think he can do that. Now, again, is he elusive? No, not really at all. Is he going to take a bunch of runs that are poorly blocked and turn them into something? No, he's not. Does the 40 time? rub you the wrong way? Yeah, it does. Like, he's not the perfect back, but I ding him. I don't destroy him for the 40-yard dash. He was a top 5 back for me before the 40. Now he comes in as my number 8 back, and definitely still a mid-round draftable running back for me. But now our next 2 backs are very different, though they come in that same tier here. 6B for me is Marshon Lloyd out of USC. And Lloyd is a guy getting a lot of hype. I've seen people put him as high as RB1 in this class, and I'm just going to be honest, I couldn't disagree more. I do not see RB1. I do see, though, a ton of potential and a potential star in the NFL because of the athletic levers that he has. He is 5'9", 220 pounds, ran a 4.46, did put up 25 bench reps. Like, this dude is a gym rat. But beyond that, his jump cut is the best in this draft. He teleports when he commits to that jump cut, and he makes guys look like fools. He can use it to change direction. He can use it, as he often does, to bounce runs outside, and then he can accelerate to the corner really well. And that's why my high-end comp for him is Aundreese Swift. That individual trait of that jump cut into acceleration is what has basically made Aundreese Swift a productive back, even if, like what I see in Marshon Lloyd, he is extremely underwhelming in a lot of areas of being a running back, especially when it comes to vision. I think Marshon Lloyd has the worst vision of all of the running backs we're talking about in this draft, at least in the top 12 here, in 2 ways. Number one, he is the most bounce-happy running back in this draft. If he sees even the slightest crease to the outside, he is going to abandon well-blocked runs, forget his blocking entirely, and just scoot things outside. And again, at the college level, it worked relatively well, but even then he ran into a lot of trouble. But at the NFL, you can't get away with that nearly as much. You're going against 4-man fronts instead of, some of these 3-3-5 fronts that just don't have great gap contain. You have super physical cornerbacks at the next level that will shed and take care of those cleanups to the outside. Better linebackers to have gap control to the backside, all of it. Those jump cuts, not to mention you're just dealing with better athletes overall. Those jump cuts just don't work as well. It's why Aundreese Swift has been honestly so underwhelming in his college career. It's why Detroit wanted to get rid of him so they could draft Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. It's why Philadelphia let him walk even though he had 1,000 yards running behind the best offensive line in the league. And it's not just the bounce happiness with Marshon Lloyd. It's also just seeing stuff and hitting it in a timely manner, being hesitant. Like, he's not bouncing every single run outside, but a lot of times when he does pick a hole inside, he could have seen it a half step sooner, and he's leaving a lot of the meat on the bones of well-blocked runs. So overall, his vision is just really concerning to me. So you are talking about a really dynamic athlete, someone with the physical traits of a number 1 back in the NFL. And hell, he even has a little bit, like, this is why the, no comp is like truly perfect. He actually has a little bit more power and toughness to his game than Aundreese Swift. While he likes to bounce everything outside, when he does engage with a defender, sometimes he will lower his shoulder and fight for tough yardage. So you do like that about Marshon Lloyd. I don't want to take that away from him, but I just think there's too many issues with his vision, and he's been an injury-prone player in his time at USC. That's also worth noting. There's too many red flags and potential reasons why he might bust that I can't quite make him a top 5 back, and I'm certainly lower on him. But dude, if he turns into a star and he corrects his vision, because it's not permanent, right? He can go to a different program. But that's the other thing is he transferred. He was in South Carolina and came here, both spots. You've seen some of those vision problems, but he's still 22 years old. He could correct his vision, but if he does, you are talking about a potential superstar back in the league. So he is, I think, very boomer bust, as is my next back here to round out this sort of 6th ranked tier, and a very similar discussion here with Jaylen Wright out of Tennessee, where Wright is, again, an extremely explosive, dynamic athlete, ran a 4.38, 11'2" broad jump. Like, his burst and speed is great. But another guy like Lloyd, where there are aspects of his film that I worry about how that's going to translate to the next level, specifically related to his vision. Now, with Jaylen Wright, I think his vision is a little better because I don't think he's quite as bounce happy as Marshon Lloyd. There's still some bounciness, but it's not quite as concerning as it was with Marshon Lloyd. At the end of the day, a lot of these backs are going to try to bounce stuff outside in college, but you did see, similarly with Jaylen Wright, a lot of that hesitancy on these gap runs. And I think you could argue it's actually more concerning for Jaylen Wright to see that, at least when it comes to the hesitancy that we also saw with Marshon Lloyd, because of the system he played at in Tennessee. They have like 15 plays at Tennessee, and they run this stack spread system, and there's so much space at Tennessee. So if you're getting the same power run 10 times a game and you're still not really reading it out and trusting the blocks and knowing where the leverage is and when to hit it, it's like, man, I wish it was so much more smooth and easy for him. It's almost like he's overthinking a lot of times instead of just going. So again, the vision worries me with Wright. But likewise, the upside and athletic traits are what you want to bet on at running back. But I will say with Wright, when he is correct and when he does flash the good vision, it's a very translatable running style. He is a speed train runner that really generates that force, that speed and acceleration. He runs and bursts through arm tackles, and then he pairs that with a really nasty one-cut, jump cut move that will make guys miss with ease, and he can accelerate through that cut really well. And he had a ton of super long runs because at Tennessee, they're spreading out the defensive backs so much that if he makes a safety miss or makes a linebacker miss, he was gone. So like a lot of his production came from that unique system, but his running style, when his vision was good, is translatable to the next level. And he is even younger than Marshon Lloyd. Is declaring as a true junior. My pro count for him is Tony Pollard, who, for very different reasons, came into the league a little bit more raw. Tony Pollard played a lot of receiver at Memphis. Jaylen Wright just played in this weird system where he's going to have to learn a lot of new run concepts and develop his vision. But if things click, you're getting a really good starting running back in the NFL. So I do like Jaylen Wright, but again, there are some holes in his game and reasons to believe that a coach could get frustrated with him and lead to him not seeing playing time right away. And then you never know. Like, if you're sitting around on the bench for 2-3 years, time moves fast in the NFL. So a little bit more bust potential there as well. And that's where the Ronald Jones comp comes in, whose vision never really did develop, but a very similar guy who was drafted in the second round because he's 5'10", 215 pounds and can run like the wind. And one more mention here, probably the biggest decider of me putting Wright a tick over Lloyd is how he projects in the receiving game. For two main things. I think his hands are really natural. Like Jaylen Wright, when he catches those swing passes, super fluid, easy transitions, gets ready to set up those jump cuts right away. Whereas Marshon Lloyd, I think, would fight the ball a little bit more, had some more drop issues, just a much more natural receiver in Jaylen Wright, but especially when it comes to pass blocking, night and day. Marshon Lloyd needs a ground-up rework in terms of pass protection, whereas Jaylen Wright, he understands that is something that's going to help his draft stock and help him get on the field early, as opposed to maybe Marshon Lloyd. So that is going to give Wright the nod there in the receiving game. But let's get into the top 5. And this is another player I got to late, but fell in love with his tape, and that is Kamani Vidal out of Troy. This dude's so good, man. And I don't really care about the level of competition because he has all of the traits that are translatable to the NFL. There's something to be said about an undersized back who is not really undersized. He might be short, 5'7.5", but he's 213 pounds. So we say undersized, yeah, he's smaller than most backs. But, Bucky Irving is undersized. He's 193 pounds. Kamani Vidal is built low to the earth and is a nightmare to try to get down. It is like trying to dive at a moving boulder and bring it to the ground. Reminds me so much of Doug Martin. That's my pro comp, the guy that was known as the muscle hamster. I see that same playstyle in Kamani Vidal. But the other thing is, this isn't just your sturdy, low-to-the-earth contact balance back. Like C.J. Anderson comes to my mind, for those that remember him. Kamani Vidal is fast, too. He ran a 4.46, and it shows on tape. He also has great vision. He presses the line on gap runs. He's got patience on inside zone. He can see cutback lanes on outside zone. You can run any sort of run system for him. He's got decently light feet and shiftiness into the second level. That's probably his worst part of his game, is like making linebackers and safeties miss and generating like crazy explosive long runs that way. But he's still pretty good at it. He's good in the receiving game. He has some fantastic catches. He runs real routes. He had a wheel route touchdown against Georgia State that was just so smooth, catching over the shoulder. He's a really good pass blocker with some inconsistencies, but he definitely is really close to being NFL ready in terms of pass protection. But like really, other than, okay, he's not the most shifty guy. He's not the most powerful guy, though he can run through and get some tough yardage. But, this isn't Jonathan Taylor we're talking about. Other than that, the fact that he's from a low level of competition and already has 780 career attempts, so he's got some tread worn off the tires. That's probably his biggest weakness, honestly. Other than that, I think he's fantastic and is a huge sleeper in this draft class. The last thing I'll end on Kamani Vidal, his production. Like, if you play at a lower level of competition, you want to see absurd production. Well, how does 4,000 career yards, including 15% of his carries, went for 10 plus yards? How does that work for production for you? I really like Vidal, and I think I'm going to end up with him in a lot of my fantasy drafts, best ball drafts, you name it. Might be a guy that in real life goes round 4 or 5, but I would be considering him round 3 and ahead of some of these other guys that are bigger names in this draft class. Definitely going to be my guy in this draft, Kamani Vidal. All right, my number 4 running back. We're done with the tier splits, by the way, is Blake Corum out of Michigan. If you're watching this video, you're probably pretty familiar with Blake Corum's game. He's been one of the bigger names in college football over the last 2 years. Really surprised, I think, every draft analyst when he didn't come out last year, wanted to finish the job, get that national title, and he did. Good on him. But I do think it actually hurt his draft stock. I think if he came out last year, he probably would have been, what would that be, RB3, where Zach Charbonnet went to Seattle. Maybe that was RB4 and I'm forgetting someone. But he was probably a second, round pick last year. But he came back and was good, but honestly not quite as good in his senior year. Coming off that ACL injury, though, that was kind of the deal. He tore his ACL at the very end of his junior season. Could have come out like a Jonathan Brooks did, who's going to be on this list in a minute. Decided to come back. And honestly, just similar to what we've seen from like J.K. Dobbins or Javonte Williams in the NFL, wasn't quite as explosive in my opinion. But I do think as the season went on, you started to see a little bit more of that juice. And then he comes out at the combine, runs a 4.52. So there's a little bit of a balance there, right? Like, I think his first 8 games, Blake Corum stock was falling. And then he finishes up the year really well. They win the national title. I think he tested as well as he would have, like if he was fully healthy the year before. So again, there's reason to believe he's trending back towards being that more dynamic athlete. But tough to know exactly who you're getting there. But as far as who he is on the field, we mentioned Kyren Williams earlier. That's a very good pro comp for Blake Corum, who, very similar to Bucky Irving, is just not a very physically dominant back. He is undersized, 5'7", 205. I think that's about what Kyren Williams plays at for the Rams, but not the fastest guy. 4.52, 4.53, pretty good time. Not the fastest dude on tape, though, for sure. But just elite vision, great contact balance, presses the line, understands every type of run, how angles are setting up, where he needs to be. There's a reason Jim Harbaugh and that Michigan run game leaned on him so much. Super reliable, is always going to get what's properly blocked up, and then he has decent enough contact balance, decent enough shiftiness and vision to get a little bit more. If you've got a poorly blocked run, he can make a guy miss in the backfield and turn it into 5 yards. He can, sense when a run is blocked up and bounce it outside at the right moment. Like, I talk down on bouncing runs outside. It's a situational thing. You still want to have the vision to do that. It's just, if you're doing it every time, you're just kind of being lazy with your vision. That's not Corum. He'll bounce things outside, but he'll do it when it's appropriate. It reminds me a lot of James Conner in the NFL, is brilliant when it comes to that balance. But the downsides is really just the size and the power profile. If he has to meet a guy in the hole, an NFL linebacker, he's not going through that guy. It's just really not going to happen. Like, he has the contact balance to break tackles in space, but if he's in between the tackles, he's going to go down. So it just reduces his overall upside a little bit. But I really do think Blake Corum, if he goes to a running back needy team or a team that has a aging veteran that might get hurt, he could be a legitimate starting running back immediately in the NFL. And I just really like the Kyren Williams comp, because Kyren did he lead the league in rushing last year? He was certainly close to it, but in the right system that can ask him to really do any type of run, just kind of get lost behind his blocking, always navigating for difficult yardage, good contact balance in space, very similar player. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams are targeting Blake Corum with the intention of not paying Kyren Williams long-term, because he really is like the same player. But let's get to my number 3 back. Very different style, but a very fun style. Braylon Allen, the bruiser out of Wisconsin. There's a big split on Braylon Allen, because he's not a fast running back. Like, if you don't like Audric Estime, you're probably also not going to like Braylon Allen. But Braylon Allen is like a supersized Audric Estime, where he's a really good between the tackles runner, really good vision, ran that power system at Wisconsin, was basically the guy that ran Isaac Garendo out of town, because he was so much more consistent at letting the blocks set up and being that gap runner. But also, like Estime, I think Braylon Allen actually has really rare quick feet relative to his size. He has the ability to actually change lanes and sidestep blockers if they go low on him. You also see it in his hurdling. He loves to hurdle dudes at the second level. That doesn't happen if you don't have some element of suddenness in your lower half. Now, he's also built very top heavy, but I think that plays well for him. It gives him those lighter feet. It allows him to really lean into and truck guys. But it does hurt his contact balance a little bit when you don't have that, those tree trunk legs to really brace for contact. And that's why you do see him either truck or hurdle dudes a lot, because going low on Braylon Allen is going to be the way to get him down. But at the same time, he knows that, and he leans into that, and he is really skilled at recognizing when guys go low and then really quickly dealing with it. So my pro comp for Braylon Allen is pissed off A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon has been a flop for the Green Bay Packers. They thought they were getting this 240-pound aggressive bruiser in the second round. Look, I think if Green Bay wants to stay close to home and get that guy again, but actually get what they're looking for, that could be Braylon Allen there. Or Audric Estime. I think both guys fit into that category, but that is sort of the draft range I see with Braylon Allen. I really like him. I think in a league where defensive tackles and linebackers and defensive fronts are getting so light, there's value in having a guy with this type of power profile. And another thing about Braylon Allen is this dude was super young, starting for the Badgers, like dominating the Big Ten at 17 years old. He came out like really young. He's going to be 20 when he gets drafted. Now, he's not young in terms of running back terms. He's got a bunch of carries built up, but nothing left to prove at 20 years old. He's got almost 3,500 yards, 35 touchdowns in 3 seasons. And he had almost 1,300 yards as a true freshman. So you talk about like breakout age. This guy's been basically ready to go since he was a high schooler, coming out as a true junior here. So consider me a Braylon Allen fan. And then my number 2 running back is Jonathan Brooks out of Texas, coming off an ACL injury. That's the first thing you got to know about him, is he might not be fully ready to go. It's going to be borderline. He got hurt in like October-ish, so you would think he'll be ready for like training camp. But, you know, if you're spending a second-round pick on him, which I think you probably do, maybe early third because of the ACL, you're going to want to be a little bit more careful with him. And we've seen so many examples lately of guys like J.K. Dobbins and Williams, and we talked about Corum. Guys just needing a little bit more time at this position with those serious injuries. And I think in terms of protecting your investment, it might be best not to give him a full red shirt, but really ease him in slowly. So that's really the biggest thing that kind of dings his draft stock. Other than that, I think he is one of the examples of why this running back class is getting underrated, because look, he's a true junior. He doesn't have a history of injuries. You do think he'll be back, but I think because of the injury, people are brushing him aside a little bit, whereas this is a legitimate like starting running back in the league as soon as he gets fully healthy. Really good athlete at 6 foot, 216 pounds, good long speed, great acceleration, light feet for a bigger back. He's really like just light on his feet. It's not like he's got this nasty juke move or anything, but it's just those subtle, agile moves, those sidestepping juke moves, I guess you could call them, where he's just good at making guys miss. He'll lower his shoulder and either break tackles that way or fight for tough yardage. Very good contact balance. He's like just perfectly equally built, so to speak, just as strong in his upper half as he is in his lower half. I think his vision is okay with room to grow. He's still very young. That's the other thing about the injury too, is he's barely played because he was behind Bijan and Roschon. So he finally gets to his junior year, waits it out, was patient, didn't transfer away, got his opportunity, dominated, and then the ACL hit. But assuming that ACL recovers, I mean, he only has 200 carries in his career? Like, he is really running back young, which if you're spending a day 2 pick on, that matters, because that means that's a guy that could be a second contract player for you. But like I was saying, like, the vision is I think still coming along. He's still collecting reps and learning, when to trust the blocking, when to bounce, when to bury your head. Like, it's just underdeveloped in that way. But he's also good in the receiving game, really smooth hands. Didn't really do much other than just catching swing passes and screens and stuff. And he's not the most fluid athlete necessarily in terms of change of direction. So I don't know that he's going to be someone that's outrunning routes wide, Jahmyr Gibbs style. But he can be a threat on third down. And for a younger back, he's pretty good in pass protection too. So there's so much to like here. It really just comes down to the ACL. But my pro comp is Melvin Gordon, almost identically built player, almost identical running styles. And I think like Melvin Gordon, who entered the league as a first-round pick back when we were still drafting running backs pretty high, he was a featured back for 6 or 7 years. I think that's Jonathan Brooks, man. So really think you're looking second round. I would think, Dallas, Texas, second round. Can they find a placeholder running back until his ACL gets healthy? That screams perfect fit to me. So he's an aspect of why this running back class is underrated. But additionally, my number 1 running back, who I hinted at the top of the show, Trey Benson, I think is the most under-discussed player in this draft class, other than maybe Jonah Ellis, who we talked about with my Edge video. But why is there no hype on Trey Benson? Everybody can see film differently and have their own opinions. My opinion is I genuinely do not understand how this is not a consensus number 1 back, a potential first-round back. I have a nearly identical grade on Trey Benson as I did on Jahmyr Gibbs last year, as a late first, early second round type of grade. My pro comp for Trey Benson is Jonathan Taylor. I don't get it. I don't get what's not to love about Trey Benson. He's full-sized, 6 foot, 215 pounds. Incredible athlete. I was tweeting out like, yeah, Trey Benson's going to run a 4.4. And people are like, I don't know. Is he really that fast? I'm like, yeah, he was running away from teams all season long. He runs a 4.39. By the way, it's not just the long speed. His 10-yard split is the best at the combine among running backs, a 1.52 10-yard split. He can explode into that top speed. Also reflected by a 10'2" broad jump, which was very good. Okay, so he's big. He's incredibly fast. Production off the damn charts. Now, it took him a little bit of time to get there because he had a gruesome knee injury in 2020 at Oregon. And that is a part of this, right? Like, he might have some medical stuff to check, but that was over 3 years ago. Transfers to Florida State, first year off the injury, has 1,000 rushing yards, splitting the workload. But in his 2022 season, the first year that he was really playing college football, not only just really good production, 6.5 yards per carry, but he made 79 defenders miss tackles on him. 79 missed tackles forced on 154 attempts. So to put that in perspective, some of the best that's ever been charted at PFF, I believe, was like 44% of his carries missed tackle forced on Javonte Williams, and Bijan Robinson was like right behind him at like 43%. But in his sophomore season at Florida State, that's over 50% missed tackle forced rate. And that's basically all in his contact balance plus his speed, where he is just a moving freight train to try to get to the ground. He's got a nasty stiff arm to just, like, he's running at full speed. It stiff arms guys to the ground, and he forces tackles that way. He's not very creative as a runner because he doesn't need to be. Why would he stop and juke guys out when he can just deploy a stiff arm and get you on the ground at an all-time rate? And then he followed it up in his second season, not quite as efficient, 45 missed tackles forced on 156 attempts. So you're getting more into like 33, 34% range, but on his career, he's at 39%, which is right behind some of the highest ever charted. But he's got better long speed than guys like Bijan and Javonte. Now, Bijan was better because his vision was so complete, and he had kind of the full package instead of in terms of stop, start, elusiveness, and all that. You guys know how much I loved Bijan, but that like missed tackle force thing isn't even really where the pros stop with Trey Benson. He has great hands. He was a big receiving threat. I think one of the best pass blocking running backs in this draft. And then, I mean, this is cool. On his 316 college attempts, 0 fumbles. This dude squeezes the ball tight, and because he's so good at keeping guys off of him with that stiff arm, there's no opportunities really to punch the ball out. So he's it's like drafting a quarterback that's not going to throw interceptions. Trey Benson's not going to cough the ball up. I just don't get it. I think this is, assuming the knee checks out, this is a guy that I'm considering at the end of round 1. I think he's right there with some of these early second round backs, guys like Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, some of these early second round backs that Kenneth Walker, another one that comes to mind, but guys that just are star running backs out the gate. And I just don't get the lack of hype on Trey Benson. I think he's phenomenal. And the key reason why this running back class is underrated, in my opinion. So that's all we've got here today. Again, if you want to read my write-ups and my grades, my analysis on every back in this class, as well as every player at every position that I've watched so far, head over to patreon.com/thatfranchise guy. You can get access to my draft guide, support my channel in the process. If not, just please do hit that like button. Really helps me out. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the remaining positional rankings videos, as well as my live draft stream, which is one of the best days, if not the best days of the year, all 3 days of the draft here on the channel. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. Peace out.